Schelling's treatise on the deities of Samothrace, translation and an interpretation by Robert F. Brown. This comes from the School of Theology at Claremont, California. In the 70s, when the translation was done, Schelling was one of the foremost minds of German philosophy around the 18th century. So, translator's introduction: The Deities of Samothrace is an address which Schelling presented on October 12, 1815, in the public session of the Bavarian Academy of Sciences, held in honor of the name day of its patron, King Maximilian IV Joseph of Bavaria. Schelling had been appointed the first director of the new Academy of the Arts Division at its formation in 1806. Move forward. The deities of Samothrace. The island of Samothrace rises from the northern part of the Aegean Sea. Evidently from the beginning it was called Samos, but later the Thracian Samos to differentiate it from the Samos of the Ionian Sea, and because of the proximity of Thrace. Ancient geographers surmised that great convulsions of nature afflicted these regions, even up to human times. It may be that the waters of the Black Sea, raised simply by flooding, first broke through the Thracian Strait and then through the Hellespont, or that the more extreme force of a subterranean volcano altered the level of the waters. The oldest Samothracian stories, transmuted into monuments exhibited in commemoration, preserved an account of this event, and from that time on they fostered the reverence and patronage of the native gods. And that is an allusion to the what becomes the biblical flood narrative in Christianity and generally the Abrahamic faiths, but moreover which was recorded by a multitude of ancient nations and cultures. The Native Americans have a version. It pops up in Hindu scriptures. It's Atrahasis, the Akkadian Sumerian Kings list, Epic of Gilgamesh, so on and so forth. So this is the cult of the Kabiri, is what this is saying, is associated directly with the so-called Arkite worship. So the ever-present awe of a vast and mighty nature intensified the terrors of these memories. The forested, almost inaccessible island forms only a single continuous mountain chain. And from its highest peak during the Trojan War, Poseidon surveyed the entire mountain range of Ida, Priam's city, and the Danaan fleet. A mysterious polytheism was established there in indeterminable antiquity. If the many-splendored Ionian Samos be renowned for the divinely esteemed man Pythagoras, who first devised a community aiming for a higher humanity, even so the unprepossessing Thracian Samos is more splendid in human history due to the cult of the Kabiri, the most ancient in all of Greece. With it there dawned in this region the first light of a higher and finer knowledge, which evidently perished not prior to, but along with the ancient belief itself. Together with the secret history of the gods, Greece first received from the forest of Samothrace the belief in a future life. According to the prevailing view, the persons initiated there became better and happier in both life and death. A refuge from misfortune, even from crime, so far as it admitted of propitiation through confession and purification. Samothracian practice in both earlier and later times mitigated the savagery of human emotion. It is no wonder that the name of the sacred island became intertwined with all that the oldest histories preserved as venerable and famous. Iasion and Dardanus, Orpheus and the Argonauts, even Hercules and Ulysses are said to have taken part in the secret rites established there and to have undergone the initiation. A report both plausible and noteworthy names Pythagoras among those who sought and found wisdom there, Philip of Macedon and the mother of Alexander the Great, Olympia, while still a child, first met at the orgies of the Kabiri. Perhaps this fact was not without influence on the future destiny of their son. Even the Roman rule spared the freedom in the ancient, evidently theocratic government of Samothrace. Divested of his realm, there the last Macedonian king Perseus sought asylum, from which he was driven out not by the power of the already arrogantly ruling Romans, but by the holiness of the place itself, and the murder perpetrated on his own commander-in-chief. Had he not been driven back by a northerly gale, the noble Germanicus would have received the initiation there shortly before his end. Authors from the later empire take pleasure in mentioning the Samothracian sanctuaries with lasting respect. So there's some of the connections. Now I'm going to skip forward to more information about Cadmillus. Thus, the first three Samothracian gods form the very same sequence and chain, in which also we everywhere find Demeter, Persephone, and Dionysus. There follows the fourth figure called Casmillos, more commonly Cadmillus, and also Camillus. Regarding this name, all investigators are now to this extent agreed that it signifies a serving god, and also that the function of the Etruscan Roman Camillus would shed some light on it. But of which god or gods is he a servant? The no less unanimous opinion is that he is associated as servant with those gods preceding him, and indeed by the specific conception of subordination. But would Cadmillus or Hermes then be subordinate to Ceres, to Proserpina, to Bacchus? For it is indubitable that he is Hermes. Is Mercury, otherwise preeminently messenger of Zeus, the highest of the gods, called servant of these deities? Certainly he recalls Proserpina from the underworld, but only at Jupiter's bidding, and not in the service of Ceres. One finds in Varro the expression Camillus, a god, the servant of the great gods. But of which gods he is servant is itself presupposed, although not made specific, because the Kabiri deities were called the Great without distinction. For their number is given quite definitively as 7, with which an 8th is associated. Therefore, as servant of the great gods, Camillus is not necessarily servant of those first 3, but it is established that he simultaneously served the lower and the higher gods. Hence he served the former only insofar as he was the mediator between them and the higher, and thus himself was higher than they. Likewise, this is the most essential concept of Hermes, to be the governing bond between the higher and lower gods. Therefore he would serve the higher and lower in a very different sense, the former as an actual servant, as an obedient instrument, but the latter as a beneficent nature exalted above them. However, it is very much to be feared that the entire Samothracian system has been placed in a false light, due to the too easily accepted view that Cadmillus is related to the first 3 deities as servant. The name itself confirms that misgiving, for Cadmillos, with the Greek ending, with the original as Cadmio, literally means he who goes before the god, and again, according to Oriental usage, this means nothing else than the harbinger, the herald of the coming god. To that extent, he is related to the unknown god, just as the so-called angel of the presence or countenance is related to the Old Testament Jehovah. For the presence means the same thing as Cadme, namely, the front. Therefore, the angel of the presence is the messenger who is likewise the forepart, that preceding the deity. Thus, Cadmillus is not servant of the deities going before him, but servant of a still future god, coming for the first time. Moreover, the other name, no less authentic, also signifies a god following after him, rather than one preceding him. Casmillus does not, after all, name merely an interpreter of divinity, as it is customarily rendered, but specifically one who foretells the deity, one who in preceding it announces its coming. Thus the names positively point to a future god, to which Cadmillus or Hermes himself, and so necessarily also the gods preceding him, relate only as subordinated, only as servant, as herald, proclaimer. Therefore, from the nature of the individual personalities themselves, it would be proven that neither the first, Axioros' unity and source of gods and of the world, is at the head, nor is there contained in the Kabiri doctrine in general an emanation system in the Egyptian sense. Far from following in descending order, the gods succeed one another in ascending order. Axioros is certainly the first nature, but not the highest. Cadmillus is the last among the 4, but the highest. So this is taken from the Great Dionysiac Myth, from Robert Brown June, whose works I've referenced quite a bit. Now, what are Ta and his sons? Ta, the opener, with his 7 cosmogonical forces, clearly represent the Semitic day, or week of 7 days, the periods of a phase of the moon and the 7 great constellations of the solar system, or rather, according to the views of the ancients of the terrestrial system. Ta is the great god, with the 7 protecting strong gods, Kabiri, who were worshipped in the inmost shrine of his temple at Memphis. Esmond, called Asclepius by the Hellenes, is among the Phoenicians the eighth, as being the chief of the seven Kabiri. Eshmond certainly appears in the modern mythology as Thoth, Hermes, the assistant or manifestation of the seven, but his original position in Phoenicia as well as Egypt is cosmogonical. We can only consider him to be a final embodiment, which his first cause was originally termed Father, Ta with his 7 children. The numbers 7 and 8 are explainable by the oldest cosmogonical system in primitive worship of the 7 children of Ta Hephaestus. 7 is neither an accidental nor an ideal number. It represented the universe by the planetary solar cycle, the 5 planets with the sun and moon, being symbolical of the cosmogonical powers of the universe, the unity of which is called the Father of the Strong or the Soul of the World. Thoth, the god of Sisenu, the city of the eighth, is always represented in connection with the 7 gods as the one who reveals himself. Thoth, the word, is the unity which has become the assistant, the revealer. In Assur, as well as in Samothrace, or Samothrake, Phoenicia, and Cam, 7 was a sacred number, and the Assyrian Song of the 7 Spirits has already been given. The subject, that, although undoubtedly somewhat intricate, is not really difficult. The 3 and the 4, the 7 and the 8 harmonize thus, and are thus regarded. The cosmos is primarily considered as being triadic and consisting of divinity, activity, and passivity, with the subtle chain of thought which, invisible as the fetters of Hephaestus, binds them together. But it has equally a septenary aspect, which is best illustrated by example. As the cosmogonic Dionysus becomes peculiarly connected with the sun, the most remarkable phenomenon of the world, so the children of the cosmogonic Ta become peculiarly connected with the 7 planets, Sol, Luna, Mars, Jupiter, Venus, Mercury, and Saturn, which stand forth as protagonistic symbols of the whole. Hence the astral element in the myth. Septenarianism, however, meets us not merely in these, but continually, in the days of the week, in the notes of music, in the 7 colors, in the 7 precious stones, in the 7 metals, in the 7 elements, in the 7 ages of man, made up of his 7 tens of years, every 7th year of which was conceived to carry some altering character and temper of mind or body, in the 7 victims of the Minotauros, in the 7 compartments of the Minotauric idol, in the 7 gates of the Kabiric and Phoenician Thebai, in the Mosaic days of creation, in the Arkite 7s of beasts and of fowls, in the 7 kine and ears of corn in Pharaoh's dreams, in the mysteries of the 7 stars, the 7 evil spirits, and the 7 spirits of God, so on and so forth. How many people were said to be on Noah's Ark? 8 people. Sound familiar? The origin of pagan idolatry. This is from George Stanley Faber. The preceding Hindu legend may serve to explain a tradition respecting the Kabiri. These are sometimes described as being 8 in number, in allusion to the whole family of the Great Father, sometimes when the most ancient Kabiric gods are spoken of as only 2, a male and a female, who are the Great Father and the Great Mother, and sometimes as 3 brethren, in reference to the triple offspring of the great parents. Their history proves them to have chiefly been the Arkite hero deities, but since the doctrine of a succession of similar worlds was the very basis of pagan theology, we are not to imagine that they were exclusively Diluvian gods. The 3 Kabiric brethren were the same as the Trimurti or triplicated great god of the Hindus. They represented indeed the 3 sons of Noah, but they do not on that account the less represent also the 3 sons of Adam. Accordingly, as one of the persons of the Trimurti, when incarnate in the triple offspring of Swayambhuva or Adima, is said to have been slain by his brother at the time of a solemn sacrifice. So, with a slight variation, one of the 3 Kabiri is represented as having been murdered by his 2 brethren. It is added in that legend that after his death he was, by the fratricides, consecrated as a god at the foot of Mount Olympus, that, stained as he had been with blood, the Thessalians worshipped him with bloody hands, and that the slaughter of a brother by his brothers was esteemed a sacred mystery in the orgies of the Corybantes. These particulars confirm the supposition that the fable originated from the death of Abel. The mysteries of the ancients were a scenic exhibition of the events of paradise and the Deluge. The early transactions of two worlds were blended together into one drama, agreeably to the doctrine of a perpetual succession of similar mundane systems. In Mount Olympus, where the slaughtered Cabirus is feigned to have been consecrated, was, as I have already shown, one of the many local transcripts of Meru or Olympus, that is to say, this is one hell of a word he uses here, Paradisiaco, Diluvian Mount Ararat. Alright, and then further in the same reference, the identity of Attis and Adonis will be shown in a yet stronger light if we once more return to Phoenicia. We there find a deity worshipped by the Greeks and Romans under the name of Asclepius, respecting whom a story is told, which blends together the fables of those two gods, and thus, while it proves them to be mutually the same, proves also that they are each the same as Asclepius. According to Sanchuniathon, Sadiq, or the just man, who was clearly the patriarch Noah, was the father of the 7 Cabiri, who were the builders of the first ship, or the ship Argo, and to them an 8th brother was added, thence denominated Esmuni, but properly called Asclepius. Representing him, Damascus relates that although worshipped by the Greeks, he was really neither Greek nor Egyptian, but a Phoenician god, peculiarly adored at Berytus, or the city of the Beris, where the Cabiri had consecrated the relics of the ocean or the Deluge. That he was a youth of such beauty as to engage the affections of the goddess Astrone, the mother of the gods, and that finding himself perpetually followed by her, while engaged in the chase, he at length, to avoid her importunities, castrated himself with a hatchet. Everything in this legend combines to show that Asclepius is the same as the emasculated or hermaphroditic Attis and Adonis, and that Astrone or Astaroth is the same as Venus and Cybele. Hence it will follow that he is a Diluvian god, and the whole of his mythological history will confirm the opinion. He was the great healer and restorer of the human race, and in his astronomical character of the sun he was worshipped in conjunction with Salus or the moon, for the lunar boat was a symbol of that ark, which afforded health or safety to the Noahic family. He was curiously connected both with the dove and the raven, which are introduced so conspicuously into the Mosaical account of the flood. He was thought to have returned from the infernal regions, and to have possessed the power of bringing back others from the same place. That is to say, he was supposed, like Osiris and Adonis, to have died and to have been revived, and he was one of the navigators of the ship Argo, which was also the ship or Beris of Osiris, and which is the same as the Argo that safely conveyed the Indian Shiva over the waters of the Deluge. In reference to this part of his character, his temple at Rome was built in an island of the Tiber, and the island itself, which seems to have been commensurate with the temple in point of size, was curiously fashioned with the breastwork of a marble in the form of a ship, the higher part of it imitating the stern and the lower part the prow. The shape which this god peculiarly delighted to assume was that of a serpent, but the serpent was one of the chief emblems of the Great Father in every quarter of the globe. This should be a curse word right here. The globe. Thus Macrobius tells us that a serpent was subjoined to the statue of Asclepius, so on and so forth. All right. We are assured by Clemens Alexandrinus that Attis was the same as Bacchus or Dionysus, and by Macrobius that Attis, Osiris, Adonis, and Bacchus were all one deity. Then we also have John Yarker, who was I think I've talked about him on my channel, but Yarker was the head of the Rite of Memphis Mizraim, that speculative branch of Freemasonry that includes allegedly up to 365 degrees of initiation, but at the very least up to 99. So this book provides a background necessary to understand elements of the Golden Dawn and OTO initiations, and this is generally discussing John Yarker, but John Yarker extraordinarily intertwined with Masonry. Very influential figure. According to Sanchuniathon of the Phoenicians, the Cabiri were the 8 sons of Sadiq, of whom the youngest, named Eshman or Achman, or in the Greek version Cadmilus or Casmilus, was slain by the others. Okay, so Miser, the brother of Sadiq, was father of Tot and received the inheritance of Egypt, and the Cabiri record it, acclaimed that the most ancient inhabitants of Egypt were of this ritual. So, and then, of course, you have Albert G. Mackey, another highly influential Freemason, who discusses the Kabiric death. Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. The Kabiri were gods whose worship was first established on the island of Samothrace, where the Kabiric mysteries were practiced. The gods called the Kabiri were originally 2 and afterward 4 in number, and are supposed by Bryant to have referred to Noah and his 3 sons. The Kabiric mysteries being a modification of the Arkite worship. In these mysteries, there was a ceremony called the Kabiric death, in which was represented amid the groans and tears and subsequent rejoicings of the initiates the death and restoration to life of Cadmilus, the youngest of the Kabiri. The legend recorded that he was slain by his 3 brethren, who afterward fled with his virile parts in a mystic basket. His body was crowned with flowers and was buried at the foot of Mount Olympus. Clement of Alexandria speaks of the legend as the sacred mystery of a brother slain by his brethren, or in the original as Frater Trucidatus a Fratribus. Down here, they lasted 3 days, during which they represented in the person of Attis or Cadmilus the enigmatical death of the sun in winter, and his regeneration in the spring. In all probability, in the initiation, the candidate passed through a drama, the subject of which was the violent death of Attis. The Kabiric death was in fact a type of the Heramic, and the legend, so far as it can be understood from the faint allusions of ancient authors, was very analogous in spirit and design to that of the 3rd degree of Freemasonry, with, as I have an entire video, Freemasonry in the Law. That's not the exact title, but it's something like that, where I discuss the relation of the term Patishi, the priest-king terminology, and its relation to Kabiri and the 3rd degree of Master Mason. Off the top of my head, I think that about does it for this one. Yep, very much love.